Oh, this is thank you, Leah. So my presentation is called "It's Just a Hostile: Exploring Disabled People's Everyday Encounters in Accessible Parking Spaces." I'm just going to rearrange my screen so I can actually see my presentation. Okay, it's just a bit slow. As Leah said, I'm a postgraduate researcher at the University of Birmingham. I'm a second career researcher, and I've worked in primarily research support roles for the last 12 years. And I've also had a blue badge for the same amount of time. I actually got it, I think, 2 months work after I started at the university. I got my first blue badge. During that time, I've had many encounters in blue badge spaces. So I started out really wanting to explore how disabled people navigate public space and how these encounters with strangers kind of affect how we can behave in public spaces and the impact that they have on our identity and our well-being. And then I realized that for me personally, that were really what I was always thinking about: accessible parking spaces. And so it kind of just, I made the decision that that's really an area where I feel these encounters are heightened for many people, and that's why I focus specifically on parking spaces in my research. So the aim of my PhD is to explore how disabled people's everyday encounters in accessible parking spaces contribute to the experience of disability and how they affect our identity. And as part of that, I have 4 research questions that I'm exploring, which are: what forms do encounters with strangers most commonly take? What are the factors that determine the nature of these encounters? What actions do disabled people take to manage or avoid these interactions? And how do these encounters affect disabled people's emotions and identity? So the framework in which I'm exploring that, I think the best way to describe it is everything, everywhere, all at once. So I'm using an assemblage approach to really try and understand all the different aspects that shape and affect encounters. So I'm looking at lots of different, I don't want to focus just on one explanatory way of looking at things, but really looking at all the different factors that play into these encounters. So my research is very interdisciplinary. I would situate myself within critical disability studies and sociology, but I'm also drawing on social policy. I've been very engaged with a lot of geographers doing research on space and disability, and psychology, looking at particularly the emotional side, criminology, gender and queer theory, and media and cultural studies. And some sort of themes that arose from my literature review were particularly around sort of significance of the Blue Badge Bay, of public space, the placement of the bays, and also the signage in those bays, and what that says about who's expected in these spaces. A key thing to consider is stigma around disability, and particularly how that has been played out in the last decade with austerity politics and associated media discourses. The idea of legitimacy and hierarchies of disability, that some people are more acceptable or deserving than others. Obviously, disability and hate and microaggressions, which is why I'm here today. And the idea of emotion work and disability as a performance, so the work that is performed in Blue Badge Base to manage and navigate these encounters. And related to that is the concept of psycho-emotional disablism, so that disablism can arise from interpersonal encounters and can affect people's well-being and can lead to existential insecurity, so that you're always on edge in these spaces. So how does hate come into this? So I'm not exploring hostility specifically, but I'm exploring ideally all encounters. So I've also been focusing on positive experiences, and I have left that in the presentation today just because I think it's really interesting, that contrast. And I've been trying to sort of push my participants towards telling me about positive encounters as well, but I think in practice the most encounters are probably negative encounters. And really, I think what is emerging from my research is that ableism and objection of disabled people underpins all of these negative encounters, whether they're overtly hostile or not. And that's why engaging with hate studies and has been really helpful for giving me a wider understanding of hate, also framing sort of my own encounters in that way, and also recognizing that if I didn't recognize it, that some of what I've experienced was hate, my participants may not necessarily recognize it either. So it's help make sense of my own encounters, but it's also sometimes difficult to process. And I think particularly when I was doing my literature review, I had a period where I was quite depressed about the fact that people just hated us so much. It was quite, it was quite a lot to kind of process, just realizing the sheer amount of hate that is out there against disabled people. So I started my research 2 years ago, and 2.5 years ago now, in 2021. And I'm planning to finish late next year, 2025. I'm using a mixed method approach in 2 phases. So the first phase was to map the encounters, which was primarily a quantitative exercise where I conducted a media content analysis and a survey with blue badge holders, and that was completed last year. So that's what primarily I'll be talking about today. And I'm currently in phase 2, where I'm exploring the strategies and the impact that people of the encounters, and I'm doing that through follow-up semi-structured interviews, which I'm planning on doing until early summer, and then analyze, and then I have a final year for writing up. And as well as a thesis, I'm hoping to produce a policy report with recommendations on how the blue badge scheme can be improved, both at national and at local level where it's implemented. And I'm also hoping to get funding to develop a blue badge board game. Just going to have a drink. So I'll just briefly talk about the finding of the content analysis, but most of the rest of the presentation will focus on my survey results. So for the content analysis, I thought it was really important to see the wider context of how the blue badge was represented in media. So I looked at articles in major UK newspapers between 2018 and 2022. And the reason I picked that time period is because in 2018, the government started a consultation for the blue badge scheme in England to be expanded to a wider range of impairments. And it was mostly framed as non-visible impairments or hidden impairments. So overall, there were 773 articles focusing on the blue badge and disability in those 5 years, and most of these were published in tabloid and right-leaning newspapers. Overall, there were 28 different topics that mentioned blue badges, so there was quite a wide range of topics, and the most common ones were mostly fairly mundane topics, such as parking fines, then, as I mentioned, the expansion of the blue badge scheme, encounters, fraud and misuse of badges, and abuse of parking spaces. And looking at the encounter articles particularly, they tended to focus on encounters as something that is a personal tragedy. They would tended to use medical model language, so talking about people suffering or giving a lot of detail about the impairment that someone had, and really sort of presenting them as a victim. And they were focused mostly on people with hidden disabilities and younger people and children being challenged for being in blue badge base. And most of them were very much sort of individually focused. In contrast to that, looking at sort of wider blue badge policy articles, most of these disabled voices were completely absent. So looking at the expansion articles on the expansion of the badge scheme, only 2 of about 47 articles actually had a quote from disabled people about what it meant for them to be able to access blue badge base. And most of those articles were pretty much copy and paste from government press releases. I found that scrounger discourses was largely absent from these articles, though some articles suggested that blue badge parking is a perk, but overall there isn't sort of the same replication as you can see in that image with headlines around 75% on sick skiving. That was very, very rare in these articles. But instead, the coverage of the blue badge built on other stereotypes about disability in terms of medical model, disability as something that's medically wrong with you, and the idea of disabled people as helpless victims of crime. So the messages overall were very basic and lacked nuance, and they focused on evoking emotions and such as pity or outrage over the treatment, rather than having arguing for disability justice or having positive disability representation. I'm now going to move on to my survey to sort of contrast that a little bit. So the survey I conducted was it was disseminated via social media, and I also contacted 178 disabled people's organisations in England to ask them to share the survey with their members, and at least 34 of them confirmed that they had shared it. The survey ran between January and June 2023, and overall I received 304 valid responses. I then used chi-square tests to check for associations between different variables, and then triangulated that with free text answers, where I had a section where I just asked people to tell me a story about one or more of the encounters they had, and I think about over 200 people actually entered something in that field. So I had a lot of qualitative data, a lot of people telling me stories about the encounters they had, as well as the quantitative data. So participants had had a blue badge on average for 12 years, ranging between 1 and 55 years. 2/3 of the participants were women, which was quite interesting, because I don't know if it's because women tend to have more encounters, or women are more likely to want to speak about the encounters in the survey. Age-wise, I was quite surprised that 40 and 59-year-olds were kind of the most, made up almost half the sample. And the age looked pretty much like a bell curve almost, which is really interesting, because I kind of expected to get a lot more younger people, because younger people tend to get challenged more on blue badge days. But that wasn't the case at all. 22% were LGBA, 8% were trans, and 6% of participants were from Black and minority ethnic backgrounds. Most, unsurprisingly, had mobility impairments, 81%, and 76% said they had a chronic illness, and most participants ticked more than one impairment category. 44% had an always visible impairment, 39% had a sometimes visible impairment. So people with an impairment that was never visible were in the minority. So I asked people really broadly about the different types of encounters initially, and how often they'd experienced them. And 74% had experienced being accused of faking. 73% said they'd confronted other non-blue badge holders abusing bays. And these were really, I think, the two types of encounters that came out in the comments as being the ones that had the most impact on people, the ones that they told me stories about. So it was either being confronted or confronting someone else about potentially abusing a bay, or probably abusing a bay if they don't have a blue badge. So faking accusations were associated with being incongruent with a stereotype of disability. So it was younger people with never or sometimes visible impairments, women, and those accusations were also more common in the south of England. And faking accusations ranged from sort of direct, well, you shouldn't be parking there, you don't have a blue badge. So direct accusations, demands to inspect the badge, to sort of surveillance where you have someone following you, and just passive aggressive disapproval as well. So having someone stare at you or touch or just mutter something under their breath. And in contrast, older people over 60 were more likely to confront abusers, and people with chronic illness were harassed more frequently. I also asked people about the specific interactions that happened as part of the encounter. And 69% of people have said they've had at least one positive encounter. The most common one was small talk with other blue badge holders, which just over half of people had experienced. And positive encounters with just random passers-by were less likely, again, for those who had incongruent impairments, so impairments that you might not expect in a blue badge bay, such as chronic illness, mental health conditions, and neurodivergence. And solidarity from other blue badge holders and strangers had a really positive impact on some of the participants, and they felt that that had made a difference to how they used their spaces. On looking at negative interactions, the most common one was staring, which 80% had experienced. 63% had experienced intrusive questions, and 53% envious comments. So those were the three most common ones. Staring was not associated with visibility of impairment, but again with chronic illness, mental health conditions, and neurodivergence. And being younger and having less visible impairments meant those people would report more often getting intrusive questions or be reported. And on the flip side, people whose impairments were always visible faced more unwanted help from strangers, as well as physical violence. And envious comments around blue badges was most common in the south of England and Midlands. So here's a story about a positive interaction that I think illustrates really nicely the effect these can have, which is from a woman with chronic illness and mobility impairments in her 50s from the Midlands. And she says, "I've also had some great interactions with other blue badge holders, usually elderly, who are keen to chat as I'm younger. I feel that sometimes it is the only interaction they have in the day. Makes me feel positive too." In terms of frequency, unsurprisingly, I think as most people said they'd had encounters in supermarket car parks at 87%, and it tends to be the first thing that's coming up in my interviews as well. I think supermarkets are just such a hotspot for tension. So shops 70%, and doctor surgeries and hospital 58% were the next most common locations. A lot of people, 42%, had said they'd had 20 or more encounters, reflecting, I think, the fact that a lot of my participants have had a blue badge for a long time. And most of them, 70%, fell into sort of the range between a few encounters a year and a few times per month. And having a mental health condition and or chronic illness was associated with reporting more frequent encounters. I also asked participants what they thought were factors of what influence. Sorry, I'll start again. I asked people what factors they thought played into them being confronted, and 67% said that they felt not looking disabled contributed to the encounters they had. 54% said not behaving in the right way were factors, and both of these were associated with being accused of faking or of misusing a blue badge day, and more likely to be experienced by younger people. But only not looking disabled was associated with visibility. So looking at sort of the numbers, I think 44% of my participants had visible impairments, and 67% said they didn't look disabled, so they're not synonymous. There's a significant minority of participants that said not looking disabled was a factor, even though they had visible impairments. There's also a little bit of a hierarchy of mobility aids emerging, with manual wheelchair users having more positive encounters, but also experiencing more unwanted help. And overall, mobility aids, I think, were a lot less clear-cut than I sort of expected. The data was slightly disappointing, I might say, but it's also very interesting that they don't seem to have that much of an effect. So age was the second most common factor reported, and that again was a significant factor in faking encounters, as well as harassment. And a lot of participants said they'd been told that they were too young to be disabled. Gender was perceived as a factor for women, especially in harassment. And some female participants spoke about feeling like they were an easy target. Traveling with children in particular was another factor that led to increased staring, intrusive questions, being followed, and also increased physical violence. And lots of participants spoke about sort of the assumptions that were being made about disabled people in these spaces, and the assumption that disabled people should not have children, shouldn't drive new or expensive cars, and have nice clothes, or hair or makeup, or funky mobility aids. And while I found that scrounger discourses around blue badges are largely absent in print media at any rate, they were still very much present in the blue badge space themselves, with a lot of people saying they've been referencing those discourses or been told they've been called a scrounger and been accused of having a fake blue badge. So it was very much kind of brought into these spaces and played out there. So here's another story from a participant that really kind of illustrates how some of the factors intersect, in particular disability, visibility of impairment and age. So it's a woman from London in her 40s with chronic illness and mobility impairment. And she says, when I'm driving my car, you can't tell I'm paraplegic, as you can only see my upper body. A member of the public stopped me as I was parking in a blue badge space. He knocked on my window. I wound it down and he told me I shouldn't be parking there and I had no right to be there. I explained I was disabled. He said I was too young and there was nothing wrong with me. I proceeded to get into my wheelchair and get out of the car. In fairness, he did look quite embarrassed when I got out of the car. I asked people sort of what strategies they'd use to manage encounters, and the most common ones would fall what I agree with sort of as avoidant encounters. So they were trying to ignore the other person, 46%, and staying in the car, 45%. And another common strategy was to try and educate the other person, also 45%. And avoidance strategies, kind of more extreme ones, like staying in the car or limiting trips, were particularly used for sort of more extreme experiences for harassment, and particularly by women, queer people, people with chronic illness and mental health conditions. And to contrast that, confronting other people was used mostly when challenging other people abusing blue badge pays, and by older people, men and people with mobility impairment. So kind of groups that were probably potentially more secure in being able to challenge. Education was used particularly again for confronting people abusing blue badge pays and also by people with chronic illness. And many people chose to kind of try and be non-confrontational initially, but then escalated it when the other person wouldn't back down. And often it ended up then with the blue badge holder being told they were being rude, even though the other person had been rude pretty much the entire time. So this is an example of that from a man with chronic illness and mobility impairment in his 50s in the Northwest. And he says, a supermarket with around 50% of blue badge spaces in use. I had just parked and a car stopped in the access and tooted. An elderly driver pointed and gestured at me, then wound down window to tell me I'd parked in a bay reserved for cars with a badge. Politely acknowledged, yes, I have. Well, I can't see a badge. It's on the dashboard, clearly displayed. Well, is it actually your badge? You don't look disabled. 5 cars are now queuing behind them, unable to pass around to park. I'm not aware of it being a game of disability top trumps, but perhaps look up motor neuron disease. That may explain the lower leg orthotics I wear and the medically restricted driving license I have. I was told I was very rude to reply how I did. The couple later mumbled something when in the same aisle in the supermarket. And the final slide presenting my results is around the impact of the encounters and whether people had reported them. So 91% said that they worried about encounters, with 40% worrying frequently, and 2/3 of people said that the worry sometimes stopped them from going out. And the amount of worry and frequency of worry were both associated with having experienced faking accusations and harassment in blue badge base. And people under 50, women and non-binary people, people with sometimes visible impairments, and people with chronic illness, mental health conditions, and or neurodivergence worried more frequently. Encounters are highly emotional, and it was clear from the comments that a lot of people were still very impacted after many years. And yeah, I'll cover that a little bit more on the next slide, but 32% had reported an encounter, and of those, 40% said no action had been taken, 34% did not hear back. So it doesn't seem like it's really it's been really very successful for most people, and most people don't even bother reporting. But at the same time, many participants called for more enforcement of blue badge pays, harsher penalties for abuse of bays with no blue badge, And that's something I'm seeing in my interviews as well, where a lot of it focuses around better enforcement. But some participants also said they'd had negative encounters with traffic wardens and police that replicated the same assumptions about disability. So here's a few more sort of stories about the impact, where a participant said it hasn't happened that often, but it's very upsetting when it does. Another one said, just left, it's just so hostile, which is the title of this presentation. Another participant said that they were so upset with the whole incident, they just wanted to leave and not have the operation that they went to the hospital to have. Another participant says, it was several years ago and it still shakes me up thinking about it. It was probably the worst experience I have and I felt completely helpless. And another final participant says, it's just constant microaggressions. So the key takeaways for me for the first phase of this research was that the reality of encounters in blue badge phase is a lot more complex than what the news coverage suggests. It's not just young people with hidden impairments, whatever that means, having encounters, but it can be really potentially happen to anyone. And encounters can range from microaggressions to outright hate crimes, but they can also, blue badge phase can also be spaces of solidarity between disabled people. Visibility and age are, I think, two really important factors that definitely have an impact, but they're not all explaining factors, but rather they're sort of two big parts of a wider idea of incongruence with a stereotype of disability, and anyone has the potential to be incongruent and not matching how we should be or look or behave like in public. So it can be having a nice car, having children, being out at the wrong time. And scrounger discourses continue to stick to disabled bodies and affect these encounters. And I think the data presented also shows that it's particularly people that are multiply marginalized, so that face discrimination and oppression in other ways that are more likely to be affected. So really the idea, even in spaces of disability, you still expect it to be normal in other ways. So now I'm doing my interviews, as I mentioned, and during those interviews, the priority is really to explore in more detail the strategies, how disabled people choose how to react in that moment, and then the impact that the encounters have had. So I'm looking at the choices made in navigating these encounters, how participants affected, and how do we make sense of these encounters. And I'm using heterogeneous sampling for that because I'm really interested in getting views from lots of different disabled people and different experiences to see all the possibilities that can happen in blue badge phase. And for me, it's really important not to judge people. So I don't think there is a right way to navigate an encounter. I hope not, because otherwise I've been doing it wrong. But I've had people saying they never confront, and then the next person was like, I want to smash people's faces in. And I don't think there's anything wrong with either of that, because precisely the idea, I think, is that I want to show there isn't a right way, because it's not our problem to solve. And I'm also very interested in exploring sort of the collective experience and cultural aspects of encounters, and particularly how it's not just an individual experience, it happens to lots of us, and we talk about it between us as well. And that, again, can affect how we then behave next time. So if you hear a story from other people, that might affect you. And like when I had a young child with me, I didn't use my walking stick, and I was always on edge, and I never had a confrontation, but I was always on edge because I was very aware that disabled people shouldn't have children, and that makes me more vulnerable to potential encounter. So just some final reflections, which I think, sorry, I've just, so I think part of what I've been reflecting about is sort of my own role in doing this research, and I find that quite challenging because there isn't a lot written about disabled people doing disability research and how that affects positionality. So that's something I've been sort of grappling with and trying to constantly think about, how am I bringing myself into this research? As I said, realizing how much you are actually hated is not easy. I would say my own encounters have become a lot more challenging to navigate since starting this research. And that's just because I feel like I should have an answer. also analyze myself in that moment, which is really quite kind of like an out-of-body experience almost, and I still don't know how to navigate something particularly successfully. And also I've had a few quite violent almost violent encounters through the research, which made it really challenging to kind of then come back and make progress. And when I just really didn't want to think about it for a few weeks, it's affected my own encounters. And yeah, and I've also had I always worry that it's leads to people questioning my legitimacy. So when I renewed my blue badge last year, I was worried that they'd find out I'm doing this research and that's the only reason I'm applying for a blue badge. Or when I was arguing with people about lack of policing and base being abused, that people think I'm just doing it for research when it's something that I struggle with just as everyone else does. And in the interviews particularly, I think it's a constant process to try and separate my own encounters and not bring too much of that into the interview, and not project my own feelings and experiences onto my participants. So that's something I'm very conscious of during the interviews. It's a constant process that I need to do that. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you very much.